Most men my age worry about the phone call that comes at 3 in the morning. The one from a hospital. The one from a sheriff. The one that tells you a name you love has been attached to a word you can't take back. Mine didn't come at 3 in the morning. It came at 1:40 on a Tuesday afternoon from a 26-year-old repairman standing in my own garage, and it started with one word. Sir. By the time I read the rest of that text, I already understood, somewhere down in the old machinery of me, that the woman I'd been married to for 29 years had been building something in the dark, and that she'd never once expected the lights to come back on. My name is Earl Kittredge. I'm 67 years old. I spent 38 years as a lineman for the Rural Electric Co-op out here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. 38 years climbing poles in wind that could peel the paint off a truck, restoring power to ranches at 2 in the morning while everybody inside slept warm and never once thought about the man up on the line. That was the job. You do the dangerous part quiet, and other people get to feel safe. 6 years ago, I retired. Since then, I've kept busy the way men like me keep busy. I fix things. Neighbors' porch lights, the Vandergrift's well pump, the wiring in the church basement that nobody else wanted to crawl into. I coach nothing and I preach nothing. I just show up when something's broken and I leave when it works again. Until 9 days ago, I'd have told you I understood my whole life. Every wire in it, every circuit, where the current went and where it came from. I'd have told you I earned the quiet part. The part at the end where nothing else is supposed to happen to a man. Before I get into it, friend, do me one small favor. If you're the kind of person who sits with a story all the way to the end, go ahead and tap subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means something to an old man talking into a microphone at his kitchen table while the wind works on the windows. Hit the like button too, and down in the comments, tell me what you'd have done in my boots. Because there are nights I still don't know if I did the right thing. All right, let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Diane. 29 years married, 32 together. She does the newspaper crossword in ink, never pencil, because she says pencil is for people who expect to be wrong. She grows dahlias along the south fence, big dinner plate ones, and she talks to them like they can't hear her. She folds my undershirts in perfect thirds. She keeps the thermostat at 74 because she's always cold, and she hums old hymns while she cooks, the same 6 or 7 she's hummed for 3 decades. So quiet you'd miss it if you weren't listening. I was listening. For 32 years, I thought I was listening. In front of God, a judge, and the whole congregation at First Lutheran, I'd have sworn I knew that woman. Or at least I thought I did. This all started on a Tuesday in early November. First real cold snap of the season. The kind where the air has teeth and your breath hangs in front of you like it's waiting for permission to leave. Diane had flown out to Sacramento 6 days earlier to help her sister Peggy recover from a hip replacement. Peggy lives alone, and somebody had to be there to cook and carry things and drive her to physical therapy, and that somebody was always going to be Diane. She's a caretaker down to the bone. That's the thing everybody says about her. Diane will drop everything for you. I was home alone, doing what a man does with no supervision. Eating cereal for supper. Leaving the radio on for the noise. Letting the dishes stack up one day past what she'd allow. That Tuesday afternoon, I went to pull the truck out to run to the hardware store, and the garage door wouldn't open. Not stuck. Not straining. Dead. The wall button lit up fine. The remote clicked. The opener's little courtesy light even blinked on. But nothing moved. The whole mechanism just sat there like it had decided, quietly and all at once, to stop being a garage door. Now, I've spent my life around motors and relays and things that carry current. I know the difference between broken and disconnected the way you know the difference between a man who's tired and a man who's lying. And this didn't feel broken. This felt disconnected. On purpose. I could have climbed up and chased it down myself. 20 years ago, I would have. But my shoulder's not what it was, And Diane had made me promise I'd stop doing ladder work alone after I came down wrong off the Vandergrift's roof last spring. So I did the responsible thing, the married thing, even with her 2 states away. Prairie overhead door had put the opener in a couple winters back, so I called them. A young fella named Danny showed up inside the hour. Big kid, work boots, an energy drink sweating in one hand and a toolbox in the other. The kind of polite young man who calls you sir out of habit and doesn't mean one heavy thing by it. "Give me 15, 20 minutes, he said, and went on into the garage. I went back inside, poured myself a coffee, stood at the counter looking out at the dahlia stalks Diane had cut back for winter. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Danny, who was standing maybe 40 feet away on the other side of a wall. "Sir, your manual release cord's been cut. Not worn through. Cut clean, then zip-tied up out of reach so you couldn't pull it. That's not an accident. You do that yourself for some reason." I read it twice. The manual release cord is the red handle that lets you disconnect the door from the motor and lift it by hand when the power's out. It's the fail-safe, the one thing that guarantees you're never trapped. In a house owned by a retired lineman, in a town where the power goes out every good blizzard, that cord is gospel. I typed back, "No, never touched it. Why would I cut my own release?" 3 dots. Then, yeah, that's what I figured. "Sir, there's something else back here you should see. There's a chest freezer behind your shelving unit. It's padlocked shut and it's running, plugged into an extension cord run up from the outlet by the workbench. You know anything about a padlocked freezer?" I stood there in my own kitchen, holding my phone, and something in my chest went very still. Not fast. Still. The way the whole world goes quiet and heavy in the minute before a storm cell drops out of the sky and everybody's hair stands up. We didn't have a chest freezer. We talked about buying one years back for elk season. Never did. Diane said the deep freeze in the basement was plenty. I set my coffee down and I walked out to that garage. Danny was standing by the shelving unit, the big steel one, the one Diane had insisted 2 summers ago that we bolt hard to the studs, the one I'd offered to swap for something nicer, and she'd said no, leave it, I like it where it is. He'd shifted a couple boxes aside, and there it was. A white chest freezer, older model, tucked into the gap behind the shelving where you'd never see it unless you went looking. A hardware store padlock on the latch, and a low, steady hum coming off it, the compressor cycling like it had somewhere to be. I put my hand flat on the lid. Cold. Working. Been running a while. "I didn't put this here," I said. My voice came out flatter than I meant it. Danny looked at me the way you look at a man when you've just realized the situation is bigger than a service call. "Sir," he said, careful now, "I think you maybe want to call somebody." I did. "Let me stop right here, friend, and ask you to sit inside that moment with me. Because I think everyone watching has had one version of it, or is going to. The moment your own house turns into a stranger's house while you're standing in it. The moment the ground you've stood on for 22 years tilts a few degrees, and you understand, before you have a single fact to prove it, that something has been happening all around you, close enough to touch, and you never once felt the air move. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line, told them what we had. A cut safety cord and a padlocked freezer I couldn't account for in a house where I lived alone that week. They sent a deputy out within the half hour. Young woman, Deputy Reyes, sharp-eyed, didn't waste words. She looked at the cord, looked at the freezer, looked at me for a beat longer than was comfortable, and then she called it in and asked if I'd give consent to open the padlock. "It's my garage," I said. "Open it." Bolt cutters made short work of the lock. I braced for something out of a nightmare. At my age, you've read enough and buried enough to know what a padlocked freezer can mean. I stood there and I told myself, whatever's in there, Earl, you keep your feet. Danny stepped back like the thing might bite. Deputy Reyes lifted the lid. No body, no blood, nothing out of a horror movie. Inside, sitting on a bed of those blue reusable ice packs, was a single banker's box, wrapped tight in heavy plastic, vacuum sealed against the cold and the damp, the way you'd protect something you meant to keep for a long, long time. And taped to the underside of the lid, where the cold would keep its battery from dying too fast, was a cheap prepaid flip phone with a cracked screen. The freezer wasn't storing meat. It was storing evidence. Preserved, hidden, kept. Somebody had built a little cold, quiet vault in the back of my garage, and then made sure the door I'd used to find it would fail me the exact week I was here alone. Deputy Reyes photographed everything before she touched it. Then she pulled the box, cut the plastic, and started laying the contents out on my workbench in the flat white light of that garage, and that's when the second storm came through. The first thing on top was a life insurance policy. On me, Earl Raymond Kittredge. Term life, 30-year, taken out years ago. I remembered that one. We bought it together back when the kids were small. $150,000, enough to bury me and pay the house off if the poll ever won. But this wasn't that policy. Or it wasn't only that policy. Stapled behind, it was a change form. Dated 8 months ago. A rider increasing the death benefit to $900,000 with an accidental death multiplier that would double it if I died in. And I'm quoting the language here, an accident in or around the insured residence. 900,000, doubled to 1.8 million if I happen to, say, die by accident in my own garage. Beneficiary, Diane M. Kittredge. And down at the bottom, on the signature line where the insured has to sign off on a rider that big, there was my name, my signature, except I never signed it. I want to be honest with you about what that does to a man. It's a strange, specific kind of cold. Seeing your own name written in your own hand on a document you have never in your life seen. Because your first instinct, God help you, is to doubt yourself. Did I sign something? Did she hand me a stack of papers over coffee and tell me it was a policy update and I just scribbled without reading? Am I the confused one? That's the trap. That little half second where you'd rather be losing your mind than believe the truth. I stood in that trap for exactly as long as it took me to remember. I read everything I signed. 38 years of climbing energized lines will do that to you. I don't scribble. Somebody had gotten very, very good at being me on paper. Deputy Reyes was watching my face. I've since learned that's the job. You watch the face before you read the room. Mr. Kittredge, she said, do you recognize this signature? It's mine, I said, and I never wrote it. She nodded, slow, and made a note, and I couldn't tell you which of those two things she believed. Under the policy, there was more. A prepaid debit card in an account carrying my name that I'd never opened. And a spiral notebook. A cheap one, the kind you buy 3 for $1 at the drugstore. I opened it right there. It was a journal, in Diane's handwriting. Her real one, the one I'd read on grocery lists and Christmas cards for 3 decades. And it was a record of my decline. Earl seemed dizzy again this morning, second time this week. Told Dr. Halvorson Earl's been forgetting things. He wants to adjust the heart medication. Earl fell asleep in his chair at 6 p.m. again. Worried about him. Found the truck running in the garage yesterday, door shut, almost 10 minutes. Scare me half to death. He doesn't remember doing it. Page after page. Months of it. A patient, careful, tender-sounding record of a sick, failing, forgetful old man who was becoming a danger to himself. Every word of it a lie. I have never once fallen asleep in that chair at 6. I don't take heart medication. I have never in my life left a truck running in a closed garage. I'm a lineman, friend. Carbon monoxide is a thing I understand in my bones. I know exactly how a closed garage and a running engine and a door that won't open add up. I've pulled that math off of accident reports my whole career. And that, right there, standing in my workbench in the cold, is the moment it all came together into one clean, terrible picture. The cut release cord. The rigged door that wouldn't open. The $900,000 policy paying double for an accident in the garage. And a journal in my wife's hand, building the story of a confused old man who'd been leaving his truck running with the door shut, who everybody would nod sadly about when they found him some cold morning, slumped over the wheel. Poor Earl. His mind was going. Diane did everything she could. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't random. It was a stage, and every prop on it had been set, weeks in advance, by the woman who folds my undershirts in thirds and hums hymns while she cooks. The flip phone was the last thing. Deputy Reyes bagged it, but before she did, she powered it on with a gloved thumb, and the screen lit up on a text thread. One contact, saved under a single letter. Gee, the last message, sent 11 days ago, 2 days before Diane flew to Sacramento, read. Everything's in place. After the holidays, when it's cold enough, he'll want the truck warm. Just be patient. Just be patient. That was my line. That was the thing I'd said to myself my whole life. Patience is the only tool that never wears out. Turns out my wife had been using it against me. If you're still with me, friend, and I know this is a hard one to sit with, go on and hit that subscribe button now. It genuinely helps an old man out more than you know. Now let me tell you what nobody warns you about when you find out your own wife has been writing your obituary in advance. The shock isn't the hard part. The evidence isn't the hard part. What breaks you is going back through every good day of your marriage and watching it turn to smoke. Because now you have to ask about all of it. Every cup of coffee she brought you. Every drive safe, honey. Every time she touched the back of your neck while you read the paper. Was any of it real? Or were you just the raw material? The thing she was quietly, patiently sculpting into a dead man? Sleep didn't come that first night. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky went gray, and I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to be confused. I was going to be exact. Deputy Reyes had taken the freezer's contents into evidence, but she'd let me photograph every page first, and she'd been straight with me before she left. Mr. Kittredge, she'd said, I have to tell you how this looked from where I sit. Right now, this is a signature that's yours, a policy that names you, a phone I can't yet tie to anybody. You understand, I have to keep an open mind about everybody in this house, including you. I understood. That was the cleverness of the whole thing. Diane hadn't just built a trap for my body. She built one for my name. If I ran to the police shouting that my wife was trying to kill me, I was just a confused old man. See the journal, pointing fingers to cover something. She made me the least believable man in the county before I ever knew there was a case. So I didn't shout. I made a phone call. I've got an old friend named Sal Ferraro. We came up together back when I was on the polls and he was riding fire truck, and we crossed paths at more bad scenes than either of us likes to count. Sal spent the back half of his career as a fire marshal, then 12 more years as an investigator for an insurance outfit, working arson and fraud. Which means Sal spent his whole career learning one thing better than almost anybody alive. How people build accidents that aren't accidents. How the lies get shaped around them, layer by patient layer. At 6 a.m, I called him. He picked up on the second ring. Men our age are always awake by then, listening to our own hearts. I told him everything. The cord, the freezer, the policy, the journal, the single letter G. Sal was quiet a long time on the line. That's how you know it's bad, when a man who's seen everything goes quiet. Earl, he finally said, who handles your money? I opened my mouth, and then I stopped. Diane handled our money. She had since our 7th year of marriage, back when I said the paperwork bored me half to death and she offered, sweet as anything, to take it off my plate. I never gave it a second thought after that. Why would I? Bills got paid. The savings grew. Everything looked fine on the surface. Everything always looks fine on the surface. That's what the surface is for. Pull every statement you can find, Sal said. Go back at least 5 years. And Earl, pull the policy history. Every insurance document in that house. I want to know who your agent is. I pulled 7 years of statements. What I found didn't jump off the page, and that was the genius of it. No big withdrawals. No wire to some island. Just small, patient, invisible bleeding. A little cashier. A recurring payment to a business name I didn't know. An account I'd never seen, catching $60, $90, never enough to notice over and over for years. But the policy history is what stopped my heart. The agent of record on that $900,000 rider was a man named Grant Mosley. Grant Mosley. Gee, and I knew that name. I knew that face. Grant Mosley had sat at my dining room table. He was the friendly young insurance man Diane had brought around 2-3 years back, the one who'd reviewed all our coverage and shaken my hand and told me what a lucky man I was. The one Diane always said such nice things about. Grant's so thorough. Grant really looks out for us. He'd been looking out for us, all right. Sal drove up from Fort Collins the next morning. We spread it all across my dining room table. The statements, the policy, the photos of the journal, a timeline I'd sketched on a legal pad at 4 a.m. He studied it without saying much, which is Sal's way of being respectful about the fact that what he's looking at is worse than you think. Talk to me about the garage door, he said finally. The night before it failed. Where was your phone? Nightstand, I said. I charge it there every night. And the cord. The manual release. When's the last time you know for a fact it was intact? I thought about it, and the answer put a stone in my gut. The last power outage. Big wind event. End of September. I pulled that release myself and lifted the door by hand. Diane was standing right there in the doorway watching me do it. Sal nodded slow. So she watched you demonstrate the one thing that would save your life. And then sometime in the next 5 weeks, that exact thing got cut and tied out of reach. He tapped the table. This isn't rage, Earl. Rage is loud and fast. This is patient. This took study. Somebody watched how you live, when you warm the truck, which door you use, where you keep your phone at night, and then took it apart one quiet piece at a time. He looked up at me. She didn't just live with you. She learned you. Cool. I got up and walked to the window and looked out at Diane's dahlia bed, cut back for winter, the roots sleeping under the mulch I'd spread with my own hands 3 weeks ago, because she'd asked me to, sweet as anything, before she flew away. I'd been tending her garden while she prepared my grave underneath it. At 67 years old, I understood I had exactly one advantage left in the whole world. Diane didn't know I knew. As far as she was aware, that freezer was still humming in the dark. That door was still waiting to fail. That journal was still ripening. And her husband was still exactly who she'd always taken him to be. The man who fixes everyone's problems, but never looks up long enough to see his own. She thought she'd already won. I needed her to keep thinking that, just a little while longer. There's a particular quiet that comes over a man once he stops being afraid and starts being deliberate. I found that quiet at my kitchen table, cold coffee in front of me, and I made a decision I have not lost a single hour of sleep over since. I did not confront her. I did not call a lawyer. I did not walk in the sheriff's office with a stack of papers and a wild story, because I understood now exactly how that would go. Evidence carried in by a man they half suspect gets weighed against the man, not the evidence. So I did the opposite of everything my panic wanted. I called Diane in Sacramento that evening, and I let her hear a tired, rattled old man. Something happened with the garage door. I told her. Repairman found some wiring problem. Whole thing had to get looked at. It's a mess, honey, but it's handled. A pause. Just a breath. If I hadn't been listening for it, really listening the way I once listened for the faint hum that told me a line was still live, I'd have missed it. Oh no, she said. Warm. Concerned. Perfect. Are you all right? Do you need me to come home? No. You stay with Peggy. I'm fine. Just old and rattled. I made myself laugh. You know me. I'll have it sorted by the time you're back. Take care of yourself, Earl, she said. Please, warm the truck up good in this cold. I worry about you out there. Warm the truck up good. I said I would. I told her I loved her. And I meant nothing at all. That was the strangest part. Not anger, not grief. Just a clean, cold clarity, like the moment the storm passes and the air goes still and you can finally see the whole valley the wind's been hiding. Now, friend, here's something I want to be honest about because I don't want you thinking I'm some hard man who had this in him all along. I am not a vengeful person. I never was. I spent my life keeping other people's lights on. I'm the fella who shovels the widow's walk before she wakes up. I've never thrown a punch outside of a barn dance in 1974. Revenge was never anywhere in my makeup. But I'll tell you what 38 years on the lines does put in a man. It puts patience. And it turns out patience is the only currency that matters when you're playing a long game against somebody who thinks the game is already over. Sal knew a man, a retired detective named Osei, quiet, thorough, the kind of man whose whole personality is a locked filing cabinet. I hired him to do two things. First, confirm Grant Mosley and Diane. Second, give me the one thing a jury believes even when they don't believe an old man. I wanted them in their own words. Here's what I noticed over the years, the way you notice things without ever knowing you'll need them. Diane took her private calls in the car. Always had. Ever since the kids were teenagers and the house had no privacy in it, she'd go sit out at her car in the driveway to talk, to her sister, to her friends, to whoever. It was such an old habit that neither of us thought of it as anything. She'd be out there 20 minutes at a stretch, engine off, phone to her ear, and I'd see her through the kitchen window and think, there's Diane catching up with somebody. I know my wife's habits. She never once thought to wonder if I did. Osei placed a small voice-activated recorder in Diane's car 2 days before she flew home. Tucked up under the passenger seat, cash-bought, patient, the kind of thing a man who's done this his whole life just knows how to do. Then we waited. Diane flew home from Sacramento the following Sunday. She came through the door the way a loving wife comes home. Both hands on my face, looking me over head to toe, asking was I really all right. She'd been so worried that garage business had her sick the whole flight. And Lord forgive me, for about an hour, standing in my own kitchen, I almost believed her all over again. That's how good she was. That's the part that still gets me at night. Not that she lied, that she was so fluent in it that the truth couldn't even get a word in. I let her hug me in the doorway. I counted her heartbeat against my chest, steady and calm, and I felt precisely nothing, and I held her a little longer than I needed to be sure of it. Then I settled in to be patient. I waited 9 days. 9 days of being Earl Kittredge, tired old husband, grateful his wife was home. 9 days of pot roast and crosswords and ink and her humming hymns at the stove. 9 days of warm the truck up good, honey. 9 days of watching her tend her whole careful little life and never once glance at the freezer she thought was still keeping it secret. On the 10th day, Diane went out to her car in the driveway to make a call. I watched her through the kitchen window, phone to her ear, 22 minutes, just like always. That evening, after she'd gone up to bed, I drove out 6 blocks, pulled over under a dead streetlight, and Osei sent me the file. The audio came through clear as a bell. Most of it was nothing. Her sister Peggy, the hip, the flight, a casserole recipe. I sat there in my cold truck, and I honestly started to wonder if I'd lost my mind, if grief and a bad week had turned a broken door and a coincidence into a conspiracy, if I owed my wife the biggest apology of my life. And then her voice changed. Subtle, like somebody easing a dimmer switch down in a room. Same voice, same woman, all the warmth draining out of it slow and complete, the way water leaves a tub. No, he doesn't suspect a thing, Diane said. He thinks the door was a wiring fault. He had some repairman out and paid the bill and thanked the boy and went right back to fixing everybody else's problems. That's Earl. Never looks up. A man's voice answered. Younger. Careful. And the freezer? Grant Mosley said. Still there. Still locked. He hasn't been back there since. Why would he? He thinks it's just my elk season freezer he keeps forgetting we bought. A little laugh, easy and light. I told him that 2 years ago. He nodded and forgot it by supper. That man will believe anything I tell him with a straight face. Always has. Diane. Grant's voice dropped. How much longer? I don't like it just sitting there. You be patient. There was again. My word in her mouth. One more real cold snap after the new year. He warms that truck up in the closed garage every single morning when it's below zero. I've made sure he does. I nag him about it. I bought him the space heater so he'll linger out there. The door's already fixed so it won't lift once the opener's cut. All it takes is one morning. And when they find him, there's a 9-month journal in my hand about his heart and his memory and the times I found the truck running with the door down. Dr. Halvorsen already half believes it. It won't even be a question. It'll just be a sad old man who finally did the thing his wife kept warning him about. Silence on the line. Then Grant quiet. And the money? $1.8 million on the accidental. Paid to me. The house free and clear. And you and me, somewhere warm by summer. Another laugh. And this one, friend, this one I'll hear the rest of my life. This one was happy. Genuinely, unguardedly happy. The laugh of a woman watching a plan click perfectly into place. He'll die thinking I loved him. That's the kindest part, really. I never know a thing. I sat in my truck 6 blocks from my own house, in the cold and the dark, listening to my wife of 29 years describe the exact morning she planned to leave me dead in my own garage, and describe it like she was reading a grocery list. And that cold, clean quiet came down over me one more time. Still, complete. I didn't call Sal. I didn't call Osei. I didn't drive to the sheriff. Not yet. Because I understood now, better than I'd ever understood anything, that evidence isn't enough. Now when the woman on the other side is this good, this patient, this fluent. If I march it all in tomorrow, she'd lawyer up, go silent, weep on cue, and point at 9 months of journals about my failing mind. She was good at dismantling things. She'd spend 1.5 years taking me apart from the far side of courtroom. She was expecting a confrontation. Somewhere in her plan, she'd war-gamed the version where I found out and got loud. And she was ready for it. Ready for the shouting husband. Ready for the wild accusations. Ready for the confused old man. So I gave her the one thing she had no plan for. I gave her nothing. Over the next week, Osei and I built the folder. Every bank statement flagged and traced. The policy and the forged writer. The photographs of the cut release cord and the rigged opener, documented by Sal, whose fire marshal reports have stood up in court for 40 years. The recording, and a notarized affidavit from the young man at Prairie overhead door, Danny, who it turns out had photographed that cut cord on his own phone the second he saw it because, and I'm quoting the boy, something about it just seemed off, sir. Good kid. Trusted his gut. That instinct might have saved my life. I did one more thing, and this is the part I'm not sure was wise, but I've never regretted it. On a Sunday evening, while Diane sat out on the back porch with a mystery novel and a cup of tea, wrapped up warm against the cold, I went out to the garage. I cut the padlock off that freezer myself. I lifted the lid, and I took out one blue ice pack, and I carried it inside, and I set it on the center of her pillow. Just that, a single melting ice pack, sweating a dark ring into the pillowcase where her head goes. Then I set the cut manual release cord, the red one, coiled neat, right beside it. And I went and sat in my chair in the front room, and I waited. She came up about half an hour later. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I heard them cross the hall, and then I heard them stop, dead stop, in the bedroom doorway. No gasp. No cry, just silence, long and total, The silence of a woman looking at two objects on a pillow and understanding, all at once, that the door she thought was still shut had been open the whole time. That someone had been standing in a room the whole time. That the ground she'd been so sure of had never been solid at all. In 29 years of marriage, I had never once heard Diane go that quiet. She was always moving, always managing, always 3 steps ahead of the room. She stood in that doorway, and she didn't make a sound. Good. The next morning, while she was still asleep, I drove down to the sheriff's office and I set the whole folder on the desk of a detective named Boyd, a friend of Sal's, and I sat across from him while he read it, all of it for the better part of an hour, without lifting his eyes. When he finished, he looked at me a long moment. "Mr. Kittredge," he said, "you understand what you're handing me." "I do," I said. "I'm handing you the morning my wife had picked out to make me an accident. I'd just as soon we skip it." Diane was arrested 2 days later. Grant Mosley the same afternoon, at his office, in front of his coworkers. 11 counts between them. Conspiracy, insurance fraud, forgery, and the one that matters most, the one with the long name that means they planned to kill him and take the money. They walked Diane out of our house on a Thursday morning. Cold enough to see your breath, frost on the dahlia bed. I stood on the front porch with my coffee, and I watched 2 deputies walk my wife of 29 years down the path she'd planted toward a car with its lights turning slow and silent. At the end of the walk, she stopped, and she turned, and she looked back at me, just once. And for the first time in 32 years, I couldn't read a single thing behind her eyes. Couldn't find the warmth. Couldn't find the calculation, either. Couldn't find the woman who'd studied me, like a lineman studies a live wire before he grabs it. She just looked at me, like I was a stranger she was trying to place. And I nodded. Once. Because here's the one thing Diane never understood about me. The single miscalculation sitting right at the center of her whole, beautiful, patient plan. She'd spent years studying what I did, where I went, how I signed my name, when I warmed the truck, how I slept. She learned every wire of my routine, and she learned it cold. What she never once bothered to study was what I was actually thinking. She measured everything about the man I appeared to be and never once checked whether the line was still live. At 67, I'm not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't slam doors. I don't need the last word. I only ever needed the last move. She spent 3 years, maybe longer, building a quiet room in the dark to leave me dead in. I lit it up in 19 days. Somewhere tonight, in a place with concrete walls and a number instead of a name, Diane Kittredge is lying awake, going back over every step, trying to find the exact moment it went wrong. And she won't find it, because it didn't go wrong in any one moment. It went wrong the day she decided that the quiet man who kept everybody's lights on would never think to check his own. She knew my signature better than I did. She never once knew my spine. And that, friend, that was always going to be her only mistake. If this story meant something to you, do an old man a kindness. Tap that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me down in the comments what you'd have done to my boots. Would you have confronted her? Would you have called the law that first cold afternoon? I still turn it over some nights. I'd like to know how you see it. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. Stay warm out there. And check your own fail-safes now and again. You never know who's been up on the line. I'll see you next time. _______________________ A small note before you go. This story is a work of fiction, written and dramatized for entertainment. Any names, places, and events are invented, and any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. But if its little lesson stayed with you, that clarity beats panic, that patience is a kind of strength, and that the quietest person in the room is rarely the one paying the least attention, then it did its job. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next one.